Welcome back to Capital City Sunday. I am joined now by Jim Bender. He's the president of School Choice Wisconsin, and also Tim Slecker, who's the dean of education at Madison Edgewood College. Thanks for being here.
Morning.
We were talking about a school accountability bill just last year, and now we're talking about another one. And Tim, as you are often want to do, you will say, hey, this needs to be discussed. And you said particularly that you felt like no one's really talking about the real life implications of what a school accountability bill and this specific bill would do.
For me, it's amazing that anybody would even say accountability bill at this point after, we have 30 years of accountability, hardcore accountability, and the data proves over and over again that if you use standards, curriculum, and tests and punishments and rewards, you find out that you have an achievement gap. Okay? Why anyone getting reelected would say that people have now put me in a position to do that again? Because that's all I hear in accountability. If that's what we're talking about in accountability, if we're talking about standards, if we're talking about curriculum, if we're talking about tests, if we're talking about punishments and rewards, we've done that now for 30 years. We've got a wealth of data. It does nothing except tell you that we have a problem.
Well, I guess they would say, perhaps, and I don't know, we'll see what the final version of this bill looks like, is that this would go a step further, and some of those sanctions would be, you know what, your school is not going to be open anymore, or you're maybe going to lose some funding as a result of failing.
The punishments have always been there. It's been part of accountability from the very beginning. And so to say that, we're going to get harder. Now think about it, we're going to now take away from you things you don't have to begin with now anymore, because we know some of the things that cause failure. So when a kid comes to school that hasn't been enriched in the arts, and we're going to defund that public school, take away money, they can't offer arts anymore, that doesn't help the kids. So it's not accountability. That's punishment. That's like Hunger Games for kids.
Well, Jim, I know you said you've been in, even though you come at this from the private school part of the equation, you said you've been involved in some of the beginning phases of this bill, even going back a year. Talk a little bit about how you feel like this bill that is coming up in this next legislative session is going to differ at all from what we've seen in the past, because what we've seen in the past, public and private schools didn't like.
Yeah, nobody liked it. And I think there's really, a number of items we're talking about, whether it be transparency or quote unquote accountability. You're talking about kind of the step one, which is the measuring stick. What are you going to use to measure if a school is successful or not? And then you talk about interventions or sanctions on the other end. We've had a problem with the measuring stick, the current report card. The current school report card is very good at measuring the poverty level in a school district or in a particular school. In fact, if you overlay a map of poverty and overlay the report card scores, they're almost identical. And so that doesn't really show what the impact of a school is on a student or a student population. It just tells you what the demographics are of your student population. So we think we need to focus much more on growth over time and focus on measurements outside of just standardized test scores of what is the impact of the school on that child or on that student population. Then you can talk about if you've got a school or a district that's not up to par, then you can talk about what you're doing after that. But we've not got the statewide report card right yet. I think that's phase one. That's where Senator Farrow's bill gets started with an accountability council that's going to recreate some of the data points and what are we actually measuring. And to who? Is it to policymakers? Is it to parents? Is it to, the education establishment, to DPI and to others? Those are all questions that need to be answered that really haven't been thoroughly vetted yet.
There seems to be a bit of a difference, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I know you feel like any accountability bill is unnecessary. Do you feel like there is a place for some accountability?
I would prefer the word transparency, because I think that in our aspect, especially with the expansion or pending expansion of the voucher program, you do want to be able to give parents an accurate view of what's going on in those schools or in that school district. I think that's a very valid thing for the state to do. Again, I'll get back to what are the data points you're doing and what you're doing with that. But the overall goal of providing parents and policymakers with transparency, I think, is a very good thing. On the flip side, for the policymakers and those in the Capitol, you're talking about funding billions of dollars into a system and to the voucher program, which is an alternate program. And they want to be able to say, are we investing that money correctly and properly? And so for them, I believe that the accountability that would follow, as long as it's using good data and good metrics coming in, they want to be able to have a bit more control, because they haven't had much control over the past 30 years. And I think that is where the legislature is certainly heading.
Do you feel like the legislature has a legitimate claim, or do you feel like that's not their?
It's one of these things. When we talk about government, get government out of it, right? I mean, for me, the evidence is clear that they're not up to the job of working with schools. In fact, the whole idea of we're going to look at legislators to fix issues dealing with education, learning, cognition, community development within the school, the social structure, the hearts of the communities, the public schools. Why would we ever ask politicians? And when I wake up in the morning and my chest hurts, I don't call my local representative to say, hey, what should I do? What can you do for me? I call the doctor. This is the part where we say they've now failed miserably. We've got a failed legislature with failed legislators that have just totally ruled the school accountability now for 30 years. They've made a disaster of it. They've done very great, though, at funneling money to places it doesn't need to go, which is to large testing corporations, large data corporations that are telling us things that any school teacher could have walked in and told you after 3 days.
If it goes through and there is a council that DPI would basically be within DPI and that's established, are there data points, though, that they could look at that would give them a better idea of how schools are doing than they have right now?
Yeah, I'm not saying we want to know that schools are doing well. In fact, that's probably both of our genuine concern is that kids get the best experience they can possibly get in school, and that we should know that. Okay, what we're doing though is we're letting politicians play politics with this, and we're not really uncovering and telling parents what's really happening in schools. Instead, we've got a battle of political, you're not doing what's right for this, and it's subsidized vouchers or it's not. Politicians have failed education. They need to now move away.
You seem to think that this model has a little more potential than Tim seems. I mean, that's my sense of it.
Yeah, no, I think there's, again, it's very complicated.
Sure.
There's not a lot of different personalities involved. I don't disagree with the fact that, putting too much emphasis on strictly standardized test scores is the way to go. But I would say this. We live in a state where, under the current proficiency rates, about 50% of the kids in the state of Wisconsin are testing proficient in reading. That's not good enough. Not all kids are above average. This is not Lake Wobegon. We need to be able to make some changes moving forward. You got to have good data in order to do that. But I don't want to discount the role of the legislature. At the end of the day, they are the ones that allocate the dollars to what we're going to do. And so I don't think you can say that the last 30 years have produced excellence across the board in public schools and or private schools. I don't think anybody's saying that. There are some great examples of where that's happened, and we need to learn from those schools that are doing the best across all sectors. I think that's there. This bill, however, I think is trying to add some independence and a very well thought out structure to that report card first. And what happens after that, I think the legislature will figure out. But to think that the legislature is not going to act on this, or they're not going to take a little bit more of an active role, I don't think is reality. They are going to come in and they are going to want to see the data points and be able to do different things. And I think for public schools, they've had a number of strict rules in place for 30 years. There's no doubt about that. There has been a bureaucratic shield over them for a number of years. I think the way forward is to empower parents, to give them more power. I hope the legislature moves in that way. But by doing that, I think the public schools, more than anybody, should be given more flexibility in what they're doing, not have either the legislature or DPI come in and tell them what to do, but free them up.
I want to let Tim respond.
Yeah, great. That would be, yeah. So do we, although I guess the same thing comes back with it, the reality of the legislature being a part of this. That doesn't have to be the case necessarily. But think about again, who do we refer to in these cases? We've got developmental psychologists. You've got people who understand learning, who understand teaching, who understand curriculum, those people have not been a part of this conversation. In fact, they've been kicked out of this conversation, and because these are the people that know what really helps children. Okay, so for me, when the legislature the new Republicans come in and say the first thing we're going to do is tackle accountability again, I'm sitting there going, why? You've already had enough time to mess around with it. Why don't you say, you know what, we're going to look at improving our schools, and we're going to do that by talking to the most qualified people that the state has to offer to help us make that make those changes if we need to make those changes. That's what I would like to hear. Not that such and such senator has got a new idea to hold me accountable.
So if you're saying that, would you say as long as this council that is created for DPI to look at these standards and so forth and to look at this accountability bill would have the right people on it, you would be okay with that?
I think it's a place to start is, are we going to be open from the very beginning to, first of all, let's not talk about it. I really like this idea. Let's not talk about accountability. Let's talk about transparency. What is the goal we're going to have here? If the goal is at the end of the day simply, though, a way to figure out how we create failing report cards, as we just said, we know where those are. We already know that. The data points tell us. We take a poverty map, we take a failing schools map, we lay them on top of each other. They coincide very nicely. We don't need to do that anymore. We need to get at what's actually happening, particularly in high poverty, racially segregated schools. We need to do the things that work.
Well, this conversation is going to continue. I know that bill is probably going to be one of the first introduced. I'm sure when it is, we'll have more input on this, more stories as we know what it looks like. I want to thank both of you for coming on today and talking about it, though.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
All right. That's it for this edition of Capital City Sunday. I want to thank Tim and Jim, as well as Michael Johnson, for joining me today.